Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Jon Trauben of Altitude Investment Management. Jon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So what was your background before investing in early stage companies? What did you do before this?
So my background experience was actually not directly related to what I'm doing now, but the skill set that I learned over that time frame has certainly been helpful in my efforts. So prior to getting involved in the cannabis industry as an investor, both on a personal basis and then through the creation of Altitude Investment Management, I came out of a 25-year plus career in commercial real estate finance. I was an MD at Barclays and Credit Suisse, and I had a position at some other firms as well. It was a great career, did well through that, but ultimately found my way to the cannabis industry, really, again, as in the beginning, on a personal basis, seeing this emerging industry and an investment opportunity for myself. And then I ran with it from there.
Oh, great. So what excites you right now?
Well, the industry itself is pretty exciting. It has, the way I describe the opportunity, I use three points to describe the opportunity, or three drivers. And the first one for the cannabis industry is that there is a huge and existing customer base that exists today. I mean, unfortunately, to get the product that they want for both health and wellness and recreational uses, they predominantly have to buy it from the black market. And so that customer base exists. And really the creation of this industry is about creating legal channel for safe, tested quality products to be bought by that existing consumer. And so when I looked at the industry and the opportunity, having that massive built-in customer base that is estimated in the US to be $50 billion of demand, that was pretty compelling. But when you marry it with these two other things, it really becomes a really interesting, compelling opportunity. So the second is that prohibition exists. And the practical effect of prohibition is that it keeps out competition to the capital that I invest in the space. So to say it differently, my capital doesn't compete with KKR and Blackstone and the other big hedge or investment houses. The result of that is that my capital has a lot of value in the industry. The other part of prohibition creating an opportunity is that it has kept out large institutional companies from providing their services to the industry, so participating in the industry. And what that has done is help the companies that I invest in grow their market share without having to compete with big billion-dollar Goliaths. While there's still competition within the industry, not having to compete with mature, well-capitalized, unfair competition, so to say, is really a unique proposition. And then the third part is that this is a new industry and a startup industry, albeit not a new product, but a new industry. And in the development of that new industry, it's the creation of a lot of companies to participate either on the supply chain side or providing services to the industry. And so really those three drivers, huge existing customer base, prohibition, creating a window of time while competition is on the sidelines for investor capital and for companies. And then the third part, this huge startup industry, which gave us a lot of choices and opportunities to review investment opportunities, was really a unique driver and a really compelling set of drivers that we think is pretty unique.
So what's your advice for people investing in startups in the cannabis sector? What do you tell them to do before they write that first check?
Yeah, I think that the cannabis industry is, I think of it different from other industries in that other industries are mostly mature, right? And so when you're looking at startup opportunities, they're generally about how do we disrupt an existing better, faster, more efficient. The cannabis industry is different because it's in its pure creation phase. It's not about disrupting something else. Now, cannabis industry might have an impact on alcohol to a small degree, an impact on pharmaceutical companies. I think that's further down the line. But with this new industry being developed, with really no precedent to look at and no historicals to look at, it really becomes an effort to really requires you to dig in and live this industry and to understand it on a granular ground up basis because the information flow is limited, the data sets are limited. So it's really hard to be a part-time investor as you're looking to gain exposure to this industry. So the result is that if you want to invest in the industry, you either find and invest with managers that live and breathe this industry every day, such as Altitude, or you have to do the same. You have to live and breathe this industry. And that's the first step, right? The second step is the industry is a microcosm of the world in terms of it covers all the verticals that exist out there in the world. We think about the industry about 11 or 12 different verticals. But the result of that is there's ag tech opportunities, SaaS tech opportunities, supply chain, data, ERP systems and opportunities, advertising, media marketing, real estate, cultivation, manufacturing, CPG, branded product strategies, all that retailing, all that stuff. So once you spend the effort to start to understand this industry, you then have to look at the different verticals. And when you see an opportunity, you need to educate yourself on the details and the opportunities of that particular vertical. So it's really, for an individual investor, it's a multi-pronged process of really diving in fully to understand the industry and the various verticals so you can try to uncover where the opportunities are. The next step of that is trying to figure out from operators or strategies or geographies where you should focus your effort. And that's a function of building your knowledge base and your network so you can be educated enough where you are not the next dumb dollar coming into the space, where you're a smart, educated dollar coming into the space. So the result is it's really hard to do this industry at this point as a part-time gig. And so that's been our approach at Altitude, which is we live this thing 24/7, really digging into all the different verticals and do the work around it. So I guess to say, no shortcuts, lots of opportunity, but lots of work that's necessary.
Very good. So what's your advice for people running startups in the cannabis sector? What do you tell them to do before they launch that new company?
Yeah, I think at this stage of the industry, it's our view, Altitude's view, that the big startup wave of the industry is pretty much over. Now, that's not to say that there's not an interesting new opportunity being developed, because there always is in old industries and new industries. So that exists, but in large part, we've gone through this huge startup cycle already. So what I would say for an entrepreneur looking to start a cannabis company is, at this stage, is what's different about you? What's defensible about your strategy? And why are you and your management team uniquely qualified to execute this strategy? We've always taken the approach of management drives the opportunity and creates the value. And they create the value off of a well-developed plan. You know, the truism in real estate is location, location, location. The truism in this is management, management, management. And so I think the cannabis world is different today than it was in 2016 and 2017, where there was room to develop a company. Now those dynamics are changing, and for the development of new companies has to be a new strategy, a unique take on it, a strategy that can create a defensible moat. It's getting more difficult. And so I would say develop that plan that differentiates you from your competitive set.
So how's the industry evolving? What are the changes you see coming up next?
Well, I think that the industry is still figuring itself out and figuring its path forward. The bigger trends that we see coming out of this huge startup cycle, as I mentioned earlier, is, in the US anyway, companies emerging into their growth stage. And as they do that, they are boxing out the remaining startup companies, and they're really starting to pull ahead and win. And so coming out of this huge startup cycle and this huge correction that has happened in the cannabis industry, easily reflected by the public companies, coming out of this correction, so think about the dot-com era, coming out of that correction, ultimately what came out of that were the winners of the industry. And that's what's happening now. We're living through that right now. And that'll play out over the next year or two. Well, actually 2 years, I think it will play out. But those are the big trend lines. And then on a global basis, the legalization of cannabis for medical purposes, it continues to pick up steam with countries legalizing. And the lesson that we learned from the North American market, US and Canada, is that after a couple years of medical legalization, recreational legalization will follow. And so we view this as a global industry and a global opportunity. We think we're well past the tipping point, both specifically in the North American market, as Canada is now fully legal for both medical and recreational. And the US patchwork of medical and recreational programs continues to grow. And ultimately what we'll see is that there will be the vast, vast majority of US states that have legalized medical and recreational cannabis. And at that point, the federal government will ultimately react. I think that's several years out. I still think we need to see a lot more states legalize recreational cannabis, and they're heading in that direction. We're excited about those prospects, but those are the big trend lines. Emerging growth stage, the continuation of the global legalization of cannabis.
So what's your investment thesis for this sector, and what particularly do you look for in startups before you'll engage with them?
Yeah, I think many of the ingredients that I mentioned earlier at the time when we were talking about the advice to the companies or entrepreneurs that are looking to start up a company, for us, it's always been and it continues to be management, management, management. I think different than some of our peers, our approach to the industry has been, let's look at all of it. Let's look at all of those 11 or 12 verticals. Let's do the work around all of those. But let's find great management teams and great strategies and the intersection of the management team that can particularly and uniquely execute that strategy. So those disciplines that we apply to our first fund applies to our second fund, which we're working on right now.
What's the biggest challenge cannabis startups face today? Is it the regulatory? Is it the market? Is it technology? What do you think is the single biggest thing that holds them back?
Yeah, the biggest impediment to the industry is regulatory at this point, both local, state, and national, and then certainly, global other countries. And the reason for that is because the customer base exists and they're there. You don't need to create them. They want to buy quality product. And over time, as you deliver that opportunity, they will migrate from the illicit channel to the legal channel. And so, that's my feedback on that answer.
So you mentioned several verticals are in the industry right now. If you had to pick one or two as good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue, which ones would you highlight?
Well, along the lines of regulation, we think strategies around compliance are very interesting. This industry is highly regulated. That regulatory burden won't diminish over time. It will increase over time. And so solutions to help participants in the industry to meet and exceed those obligations, we think that's really interesting. We also think media marketing and advertising strategies are very interesting. There's very limited channels to be able to reach and develop a relationship with your customer, be it brands or services. And so channels and platforms to deliver those messages and to build that relationship, we also think is very interesting and has value. And then we also think that emerging strategies around what they call biosynthetic production of cannabinoids, meaning instead of growing the plant and then extracting the chemical compounds, you can do that through in an in-lab structure. The result of that is you're producing the same chemical compounds, but at a much lower cost basis, because you don't have to grow this plant and then go through the process of extracting. So I think those three strategies, or two verticals and a strategy, to us are really interesting opportunities going forward. But beyond that, I think that the industry as a whole presents really interesting and compelling opportunities. But again, it requires time and effort to, as an individual investor, to build up enough knowledge base to the point where they should invest their dollars, and then they can do it on an informed basis.
I see. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, I think from our perspective, I'd give a shout out to my firm Altitude. We see the emerging opportunities in the cannabis space in two primary buckets. The first is, as I mentioned earlier, in the U.S., the emerging growth stage companies coming out of the huge startup cycle. There's healthy versions of those companies, and there's distressed and stressed versions of those companies. Altitude, we think, is uniquely positioned amongst our peers to execute on that strategy. We have years of cannabis investing experience, and via my partners, we have decades of distressed investing. And so those two skill sets coming forward to really where the opportunity is emerging in the cannabis space in the U.S. is, I think, positions us well to execute. The second core opportunity that we're seeing is the emerging medical cannabis industry in Europe. Now, it's happening globally. Our focus is in Europe. Europe is 750 million people, and it's really a hodgepodge of what states or countries like the U.S., and they're doing legalizations happening country by country. But the emergence of that medical program is creating really interesting investment opportunities. And we believe Altitude is uniquely positioned to execute that strategy for the following reasons. First, because we have years of cannabis investing experience. We have an investment in over 20 companies to date, spanning the industry in 4 countries. But also, via my partners, we have decades experience of living, working, and investing throughout Europe. One of my partners lived in Europe for 20 years, both in Zurich and London. He speaks German fluently. And so we just think we're well positioned uniquely for the emerging European opportunity. And so that's what really excites us about the next leg of this industry and the opportunity. The opportunity set that we're emerging, we've identified, we've developed a high conviction and clarity on those, and our skill set aligns perfectly where those opportunities exist. So we're really excited about the next leg of this industry and the opportunity.
Well, great. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Yeah, so I believe our contact information will be listed with the podcast, but you can go to our website, altitudein.com, and please reach out to us through there.
We'll add those to the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Thanks so much, Hal. I appreciate it.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.